Enterprise Forum is hosting a roundtable joined by the program managers from the global and regional development agencies. I am Boram Lee, World Bank Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. Many modernization projects are undertaken in low and mid-income countries to improve capacities for hydromet services, to enhance public infrastructure for monitoring, prediction, and knowledge production in the field of weather, water, and climate. Over years, development partners marked a significant success and gained considerable knowledge. In the meantime, we have witnessed rapid changes in our scene. Sustainability continues to be a great challenge for those projects, bearing the questions as to how to ensure lasting impact of those change projects and how to maximize these benefits for the whole country or region, and what are the viable approaches to ensure the both. Our panelists today will share their experience and thoughts about these questions, clarifying the vision and practical approaches for future development projects. We primarily set Africa for our starting point, where all presented partners are actively carrying out hydromet activities. Please bear in mind, however, that these issues and ideas are applicable to other regions as well. Now, let us welcome our panelists. Benjamin, may I ask you to start?
Yes, thank you very much, Boram, and also thanks for the invitation. Very glad to be here. My name is Benjamin Hodig. I'm with GIZ, the German International Corporation, and since 2017, I have been heading the global project Enhancing Climate Services for Infrastructure Investments, CSI. The project is funded by the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. And as a global project, we are working in partner countries such as Brazil, Costa Rica, Vietnam, and with our partner, the Nile Basin Initiative, NBI, which is located in Uganda, but has also satellite offices in Rwanda and Ethiopia. I have been working in international cooperation for about 15 years with special focus on public sector reforms, climate change adaptation, and focus on sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.
So my name is Benjamin Lauquet, and I'm a regional technical advisor with the Nature, Climate and Energy team in UNDP. My work is to help countries access climate finance for climate change adaptation. And I've been working in supporting countries for about 50 years with a focus on climate information and hydromet services, early warning systems. I'm very happy to be here and to enjoy this conversation. Thank you.
My name is Joseph Interful. I'm the Senior Climate Information Early Warning Systems Specialist within Division of Mitigation and Adaptation of the Green Climate Fund. I manage over $1 billion worth of projects within adaptation and have over 20 years of experience in supporting countries in developing climate change and development projects, supported over 100 developing countries globally. Prior to this, I've worked at the UN Economic Commission for Economic Commission for Africa as a climate change senior expert, and also with UNDP African Adaptation Program and the UK Med Office.
I'm Makoto Suwa. I'm a senior disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank. I'm working on projects and programs in Africa aiming at strengthening countries' resilience to climate and the disaster shocks, mainly through strengthening weather, climate, and water services, which we often abbreviate as hydromet services, and also the early warning systems. My background is climate science, and for recent years, I've been working on climate and disaster challenges through an international development lens, and I'm very happy to join this conversation.
So my name is Valentina Villorria. I am here representing the European Commission's Director General International Partnerships, also known as DG IMPA, and before January this year, we were known as DG DEFCO. So I am a program manager with more than 12 years working on climate change, mainly adaptation and disaster risk reduction programs. But specifically during these past years at the European Commission, I have conceptualized, designed, negotiated, and currently managing the intra-ACP Climate Services Program, also known as CLIMSA, which aims at increasing the capacity of Sub-Saharan Africa, Caribbean and Pacific regional climate centers to increase the generation and use of climate services and application for decision making. So I'm very happy to be part of this discussion today.
My name is James Kinyangi. I am the coordinator of the Climate and Development Africa Special Fund here at the African Development Bank in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. I coordinate the work of the fund, which is related to building capacities of countries, regional organizations, and communities across Africa in designing and developing, including modernizing their climate information and early warning weather systems. In addition to that, I am also responsible for providing the linkage to policy and outreach, including donor communications for the fund, and also a small portfolio where we have outreach to the private sector. Previous to my moving here to coordinate this work at the fund, I served as the Chief Policy Officer for the fund, providing a lot of the programmatic input to the development of new projects. And prior to that, I worked for the CGIAR program on climate change, agriculture, and food security, where I was the program coordinator for East Africa for 5 years. And before that, I also worked for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, supporting the EU-funded technologies for agricultural development in Swaziland, Southern Africa. So, and I'm very pleased to join you in the discussion.
Thank you, and welcome again. Let us dive in now. The hydromet value chain is in constant evolution. Rapid technical advances, open data policies, and many other factors have driven a breadth of changes. Ever-increasing societal demands call for more and better services in weather, water, and climate. Many development projects are responding to the need to close the gaps between the expectation and capacity to meet such demands. So let me ask a question to the panelists. Where are we now? What are the notable changes or desirable changes yet to happen in the design and implementation of development projects?
Yeah, thank you very much, Boram. It's a very interesting question. Notable changes. So you see, 10 years ago, approximately, to not go back too far away, we used to approach project design by just thinking that we would buy hydromet equipment, automated weather stations, etc., computers, and train the staff at the Met departments of the countries that we were supporting. And that this combination of equipment and training would automatically lead to services to the population in terms of climate information, agromet advisories, and early warning. And well, it turned out that it didn't work that well, or it only worked in parts. And there were many problems with operating and maintaining the equipment and actually designing and reaching the people with the right information at the right time. So things have changed since then. And we've moved from this kind of equip and train to focus rather on designing some projects towards providing services. And the key is here, it's about providing services, and it's focusing on the last mile, on the whole entire hydromet value chain, on breaking silos, and innovation in private sector. So these are the big changes that I've seen in the last 10 years. And you were asking about the desirable changes. Well, there are many We really need to improve coordination between multilateral agencies and donors. There are very deep silos within governments of countries where, you know, the hydromet or the meteorological department doesn't talk to the water department, or they don't talk to the emergency and disaster management authorities. So these are real problems for effective delivery of such services. And then we need to improve coordination, data exchange, and, you know, SOPs for information flow between government departments is crucial. And it's interesting. I say this, maybe it's out of context, but, you know, we need to improve internet coverage. It seems strange, but internet coverage is so crucial for people to have real-time information. So basically, we've tried kind of reverse the logic from, you know, from going equipment to what do we need? What are the services that we need, and therefore what are the investments to make those services happen? And really now the focus is on the last mile, on early action and preparedness, and on this kind of co-creating the messages with the community so that they're really able to actually take action when they get them. Over.
Absolutely. You actually made a lot of points that we can discuss for whole day. But let's hear of this, the other panelists as well. Can I ask James to add on to these points?
Thank you, Boram. And let me add what Benjamin raises. It is related to interagency coordination. I think I like to use the example of where we had this workshop in Seli in Senegal, I believe it was in 2017, where we tried to map all of the different actors that were working across Africa in supporting initiatives to deliver climate information early warning services. And just that short mapping exercise amongst the partners that were meeting in Sali revealed that there were close to between $3 to $5 billion that was going into investments across Africa that is related to climate information services. And that the aspect of coordination was really the missing gap at that particular time. However, from that workshop in Seli, we had more discussions, especially under the hydromet effort, with the hydromet alliance partners, with the leadership of WMO. And it has become apparent that apart from those gaps that we realized in coordination of our work, that there are some fundamental gaps that also exist within the foundational basis of the basic observation network. And we will speak a little bit about that gap in the foundational basis of the observation network a little bit later on. But what I would like to say, what has emerged and what has changed also, in addition to what Benjamin says over the last few years, is that three distinct communities have emerged across Africa. Those that are pursuing the policy stream through the UNFCCC, and they have a very big influence within the countries and the regions because they are discussing important issues that are related to climate change, including the NDC regime and also the adaptation regime. So that's one community. Second community that has emerged is the community around DRR. So with the implementation of the Sendai framework, together with the Program of Action for Africa within the what we call the Disaster Risk Reduction Platform for Africa. So there is that community also because Africa is now increasingly facing the repeated occurrence of extreme events, droughts, tropical cyclones. We are seeing a lot of this emerge. And then thirdly, there is the what you would sort of call the climate change community, and this is the community that's around that's driving the policy processes, not just at the country but also at the subnational level. So the community that is focused on, like Benjamin said, you know, designing applications and services for communities. And this has got a lot of participation of the NGOs and the private sector. So you also have that community. So there are these three communities that have emerged, and we are still trying to come to grips on how we can not just create the the core services within these three communities that are emerging, but also how we can share across platforms in order to make sure that we have a one approach towards climate adaptation in Africa.
Thank you very much. And it's really good to hear from the regional focus and the regional context from you, especially. So let us move on to Joseph to hear your point of view, please.
So thanks a lot, Baram. I would like to pitch my discussion looking at the impact. If you look over the last 50 years, we see significant impact of climate variability and change on development, 3.7 billion dead, 7.6 billion people affected. And in terms of the damages relative to GDP, we see over 0.2% of world GDP annually being impacted by climate variability and change. The cost of establishing systems and processes to manage this is significantly expensive for developing countries to do this alone. So we see a lot of expression of interest expressed through the NDCs. But then if you look at the demand side of the equation, there's a lot of demand as a result of this impact. In terms of the market assessment, we see that the lowest capacity to manage this is in Africa, LDC and SIDS. But looking broadly, we see that the growth is driven by vibrant private sector through demand for aviation, energy, large-scale agriculture, infrastructure, resilience, and others. So it's becoming very clear that hydromet services and the broader resilient landscape is going beyond just a public weather service, but opportunity to also bring in private sector to create the business case that will enable us to drive uptake and investment in climate information and early warning system. But particularly important also, we realize that the COVID has really exposed the vulnerability of our hydromet system. If you look at what has happened to date, pre-COVID compared to what has happened, over 80% of aviation observation has declined with about 90% in Africa. But then also you see also availability of surface data has increased significantly in Africa and other parts of the globe, as well as oceans observation that are critical for forecasting and monitoring our climate system. So the problem goes beyond just climate, but also looking at the broader risk that we face. And so transition to automation becomes very, very important, where we could improve frequency and resilience of our reporting and forecasting system and early warning system. So critical to this is to look at what are the critical elements that will enable paradigm shift to address the challenges that we face. The MET services were designed not to manage or address the type of challenges that are emerging. So it becomes very important to leapfrog these old systems that we use and look beyond the traditional MET service, look at how we could bring in innovation from the private sector, academia, and even citizen science to drive some of these innovative ideas that are coming up, enable us to be able to do that. But in terms of barriers, we see that lack of enabling environment for institutional effectiveness. We see lack of coverage and scale for effective service delivery in terms of the quantitative and qualitative enhancement of hard infrastructure as well as soft, uncoordinated interventions that limit the effectiveness of support, as well as the limited budget that the government provides. We need a lot of investment to really be able to drive uptake and investment in climate services. But of course, also the complexity that comes with production, dissemination, and uptake. But more importantly, also the market barriers in terms of lack of policy to create an enabling environment for private sector to be part of this equation. So policy incentive to this risk investment becomes very, very important. And so what I would say is that there's a lot of opportunities that are also emerging in terms of looking at how we can address the barriers. And more importantly, also, we've seen that ICT is actually driving innovation in all sectors. And climate services is over 60% ICT. And so bringing in the knowledge in terms of Internet of Things, in terms of big data analytics, artificial intelligence, and other innovations that are driving the global system will really help to transition the hydromet services, make it more fit for purpose, and people-centered. And also we need to look at the investment paradigm in terms of funding paradigms. We need to look at blended finance, innovative finance, and architecture to help us structure projects, develop the capabilities, bring in innovation from the private sector to enable us to really develop the last mile system that Ben spoke about, but also be able to predict and provide better forecasting capabilities and broaden this in terms of bringing in public-private partnership. Thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yes, let us continue to hear from Makoto about those points. Makoto.
Thank you, Boram. Well, in terms of the changes which happened in the last 10 years, I fully agree with Benjamin, and you know that this narrative emphasizing on the delivery of services really emerged strongly in the last 10 years. And of course, if you ask a question how well we are doing in terms of supporting country to develop services, perhaps there's still a lot of rooms for improvement. I'll just share with you that perhaps the three quick points that I observed as a recent trend. You know, that the first, we all know that the many economic sectors are sensitive to climate conditions, and they already feel that the impacts of climate and disaster, you know, that the disasters and climate change and the variability. So it is not very surprising to see that the number of sectoral projects are now, you know, talking about the effective utilization of hydromet services to mitigate the climate and disaster impacts. Agriculture and water resources management are good examples. And for example, the World Bank is financing such sectoral projects that have a hydromet component. And I think this this trend is creating actually the you know, opportunity to reinforce the narrative of emphasizing service provision to key sectors, and also that these sectoral projects that have a hydromet component make us to see hydromet services from the demand side, right? So in an agriculture project I'm working for instance, what agriculture stakeholders want to ensure is that they can access information services that are reliable and usable for decision making, and the sources of such information are of secondary importance. They could be either public or private sector, as long as services they get meet their requirements. To me, this really contrasts the project focusing on the project of the national meteorological and hydrological services alone. Second point of observation is about timescale. We all know that the developing institutional capacity is critical to ensure sustainability of investment outcomes, but it usually takes a long time to build such capacity for technical agencies like National Met Hydrological Services. But at the same time, we cannot really wait for 10 years before we see the impacts of any investments. So the question is that how to make tangible impacts of investments very quickly while working on something which take longer time. In development projects, we need to somehow think to support, you know, these two aspects requiring a very different time scale somehow at the same time. And third point, and this kind of relates to the points raised by Joseph, but I would say the tone of discussion has changed quite a bit in the last few years, especially in terms of involvement of private sector. I see more open and constructive discussion in the continent in the last few years compared to, say, 10 years ago. But how to factor this in, that the private sector involvement in the design and implementation of the project is still at what we need to work on going forward. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Makoto. So now let us continue with Valentina to hear her opinion, please.
Thank you. Well, let me just start by focusing on the changes as the previous speakers did as well. So in my past 5 years at the Commission, I have witnessed an increase in the importance of climate data and science-based information and services for decision making, and the surge, of awareness, even at an institutional level. So, for example, the recently adopted European Union adaptation strategy calls for climate change actions to be informed by robust data and risk assessment tools, and that they should be available to all, from businesses in coastal regions to farmers planning their crops. So the strategy aims to push the frontiers of knowledge on climate change so that we can gather more and better data on climate-related risks. So, well, the strategy as a point apart is also unique because it includes an international dimension for the first time. So acknowledging the EU role in the world and in the global climate adaptation agenda. So, well, I think this is also due to the increase of availability and the resolution of satellite data worldwide. And I think this data have made a very important contribution to weather forecasting and climate monitoring, which complementing, the surface-based observations. And I think it will increasingly do so in the future. So, for example, the Copernicus, the EU observation program, Earth observation program, has received a strong push from decision makers at the Commission. And and we are working very hard in establishing agreements with African and other organizations in the world to ensure that they also have access to the wide range of data and services that the Copernicus program can offer. And we are trying to support these organizations to build their capacity to use these services and of course, customize them to their needs. So, well, there is already a memorandum of understanding with the African Union Commission. So, well, about the changes needed, I mean, I cannot agree more with the previous speakers, but well, from my side, looking to the future. So one concern that we have shared in the past is the reliance of these services on official development assistance or on ODA funds. So we are concerned that these investments that are made in the past are either too old or not maintained or will be lost or are already lost, and or that the data that is being generated is not necessarily shared at a global level or is not compatible, so on. So we consider that this data is key for adaptation to protect the most vulnerable people from the assets and lives. So we think that governments are and should be responsible for sustaining these hydromet services for many sectors and application areas. So we think that there is, of course, then a lot of scope to build partnerships with other sectors, for example, the private sector and academia, who can play a role and move away maybe from this old style hydromet or traditional hydromet projects. So, well, through the CLIMSA program that I mentioned before, we are trying to move towards this. So we are working with the regional climate centers in sub-Saharan Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific. And we are insisting on the need to get all the users, private sector, government, and academia together to discuss, So we are trying to set up and push this fora to discuss with all the different users and the providers of the services their needs and the challenges. So, but yeah, we see that it's not easy. We feel that there is either resistance to change or it's just too difficult to change the status quo. So this is our experience, but okay, this is work in progress. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Valentina. We know that this is not a simple but a multifaceted question, but we see already some kind of converging on main issues here. So lastly, can we hear from Benjamin from GIZ about the same questions? Going to you, please.
Thank you very much, Boram. Well, I guess I also agree to all of you, and I would like to also echo those statements by Joseph and by Benjamin. For us, I think to put a different angle into this discussion, it's very important to also look at the demand side. So creating services, a different value chain of climate services, it's important to look at who's actually articulating the demand. And our project, for example, focuses on infrastructure, other projects on public health or agriculture. And I guess it's absolutely important to see that the fundamental narrative behind this is rising costs now, but also in the sooner future, related to losses and damages based on extreme weather events. So I think it is important, since many drivers, public drivers, are not only the Met services, but also the ministries for the environment. We need to look into coalition building at the ministerial stage or level. And here we actually create a narrative in which other sectors related, for example, to infrastructure, see a certain incentive to join the cooperation and to join the forces, not only related to other sector ministries and infrastructure related ministries, but also finance and planning, even state audit offices. So I think that is very important, also keeping in mind that we are in the course of implementing NDCs and national adaptation policies. And in this case, we see a great potential for good implementation on the ground. But in addition to that, of course, it is important, and I think that's the selling point here, that many infrastructure owners, for example, they want to know what their climate risks are. And to better identify adaptation options, increase the efficiency, effectiveness, to avoid lock-in effects and also maladaptation, climate services become more and more important. Most people also now understand this consequence and this connection. So I think what's important is a coordination and facilitation also on the ground and technical levels between those climate scientists and other that usually take those services, engineers, for example, to make sure, of course, there's capacity development related to the pillars of the GFCS, the Global Framework of Climate Services. And last but not least, also to build coalitions among development partners, but also to look into coalitions and cooperations with strong partners from international Met services or engineering agricultural associations. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, all panelists. It is clear that a lot has been done, yet we are in the middle of transition. Investment continuously and increasingly prioritize early warnings and impact, and effort to reach the last mile of the service chain. We note also that the need to further leverage political and high-level support. In fact, these bring the key society-wide subject closer to the facing challenges of the global weather enterprise, that is, building economic resilience. Also, more and more, we see the need to widen the scope in terms of the various stakeholders' roles in the hydromet value chain. The latest changes call for a higher degree of engagement by not only the government and public sector, but also private, academic, and other stakeholders. Along this line, let us look into the emerging roles of the private sector and public-private academic engagement in the development project. How the emerging private sector can contribute to the national and regional development projects? Can we bring up some examples for emerging opportunities and also obstacles for private sector engagement?
I think it's a great opportunity. We live in very exciting times. If you look at opportunities that are emerging, you look at globally, there's growing demand that far exceeds supply. If you look at the NDCs that were submitted during the Paris Agreement, about 77% of African and Middle East countries, 76% of Latin America, and 100% of Asia Pacific countries have requested for the need for climate information and early warning systems. And also climate information and early warning systems and the broader resilience landscape have a market potential. Actually, is a good business. It's well established. For every dollar of investment, you have about 4 to 30 in terms of the return on investment. So it's a good business, and the market potential for unlocking a private sector investment and participation has become very key. The growing commitment across global, continental, and national frameworks like the Paris Agreement Sustainable Development Goals. You look at Agenda 2063 of the African Union, the Global Framework for Climate Services, all shows a commitment that requires the partnership between government, public and private sectors, civil society and the rest to come together. But also a unique opportunity to enhance coherence and complementarity of investment, leveraging the potential that private sector brings, because the public sector cannot do this on their own. So leveraging private sector finance, public budgets, and public-private partnership has become very, very critical. But I see 5 practice areas where we could maximize mobilization and impact. That is, in terms of the private sector, we see like climate funds can be a very good avenue, mobilize equity investment for climate through funds. Financial institutions, for instance, green lending and risk sharing through financial institutions. We also have project finance in terms of the life cycle financing for high impact projects, as well as the climate market, so develop capital and carbon markets for impact, and also climate technology and innovation. So we're looking at ICT as a driver, as a business area that private sector can come in and help us to transition into the new area of climate information and early warning systems. So investments in transformative climate technologies will become very, very critical. So these 5 key areas in terms of public-private partnership is critical. What is also important is the flexibility in deployment of instruments. Financial instruments will be critical. Innovative financing mechanisms are critical in terms of loan, grant, equity, result-based payments, and guarantees. Needs to be integrated into the broader perspective. At the moment, we are seeing mostly grants, which makes it not catalytic enough. But I think what is very important also to state here is that within our portfolio, we are seeing that only 21% of the demand goes into modernization of hydromet services, whereas 79% looks at application in the various sectors, private sector, areas that I spoke about. So the major demand is to move away from the traditional infrastructure-based investment, public sector type of investment, into a service-based sector investment that will enable us to bring in the private sector to deliver those critical systems and processes that we need to provide to advance low emission climate resilient development. Also to state, in terms of a bit of a perspective, historical perspective, initially, what was happening is that the Met service would generate products and then assume that people will use, the private sector will just use. We know that that is not the case. It has to be user-driven. The private sector has to co-design and co-implement the project. And so there is a need to look at the investment element. Investment criteria is very, very critical. The impact potential of those investment, the paradigm shifting elements of investment will be very, very important. So the private sector also can leverage also investment. They can support academia that can bring in the science. So open source technologies are very, very important. The government need to support that, need to create investment that builds the basic critical infrastructure that private sector could use to generate revenue as part of the equation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. In fact, this is a really interesting point to hear that the majority of financing is actually move on to the service-based and related activities. Let us hear from Makoto about these points. What are the opportunities and blockers?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree with Joseph that there are a lot of the emerging opportunities for public-private engagement in Africa in the hydromet space. You know, such opportunities can be found virtually everywhere along the hydromet value chain, you know, from the development, operation, and maintenance of the infrastructure to the development and communication of tailored or more integrated services. For example, if the machine readable data from the different sectors become more and more available, that would create a lot more opportunities to also develop the integrated services by bringing together, you know, those different data layers and by using machine learning type of technology and provide more targeted decision support for specific sectors. And I'm sure this type of thing is where the private sector can also add a lot of value. But in order to make an appropriate space for the public-private engagement, I think we need a few things. First, this is also touched upon in the previous conversation, but it's about creating enabling environment and the policy legal framework. The roles and responsibility of national met hydrological services in a given country should be clearly defined so that the private sector also knows where they can add most value in the national hydromet ecosystem. I think, and then also I think that such a definition, of the NMHS roles and responsibility should take into account the realistic view on their budget and capacity prospect, priorities, and also the comparative advantages as a public entity, and not based on the wishful thinking which we sometimes observe. Second, it's about trust. In various workshops and meetings in Africa, we have heard a lot about the importance of building trust between the public and private sectors. We've had, fora to discuss issues by bringing together public and private sectors at the global level, such as the GFTRR-sponsored Global Weather Enterprise Forum and open consultative platform organized by WMO. And I have personally witnessed that, that such fora have been actually helpful in building trust between public and private sectors. And I think we should do something similar at the regional, sub-regional, and maybe the national levels in select countries in Africa as well. Third, Voram, you asked about the concrete examples. I think that still the examples in this continent in terms of the public-private engagement is rather limited, and I think we need actually more innovative examples of public-private engagement. I mean, today I see the public-private engagement discussion is often narrowed down to a few well-known examples, such as partnering with mobile service providers to disseminate information. Which is still valid and important, but there are a number of more new technologies and business models which can be tested and harnessed and also help broaden the scope of the PPE discussion, public-private engagement discussion in the continent. So we perhaps need to make a concerted effort to try out different public-private engagement models. After all, I think that we are still in the very early stage and in the learning by doing phase. In terms of the public-private engagement. And the last point I would like to make is that the importance of encouraging, more local entrepreneurships and the startups. I mean, they can not only create more partnership opportunities to link regional and global companies and local partners, but they can also come up with innovative solutions which would meet the local requirements better. So here.
Indeed, there are very critical points that the building trust and the legal framework to enable the environment for the constructive public-private engagement is in fact the emerging issue, especially for the last couple of years, and these are actually the foundation for those the revive and vitalize the innovative approaches. So let us continue with Valentina about talking about some examples and the opportunities and blockers.
Thank you. So as mentioned earlier, through EU-funded programs and specifically CLIMSA, we are supporting the establishment of partnerships with the private sector. So we're proposing to develop, structured dialogues between these users and either the national meteorological and hydrological services or regional organizations. So we think that these dialogues can help to understand the needs and the challenges and all this on both sides, and then how to address them as well. But I would like to maybe take one step backwards and ask, who is the private sector? Because this is a very generic term, and it's something that we would maybe need to ask ourselves, because the private sector can mean many things. And I think we need to break down the private sector into the different sectors and then refocus the support to these sectors. For example, well, basically stop referring to these services as hydromet or climate services, but maybe mainstreaming into the different, sectors, for example, agribusiness or transportation or construction. So going more into those to that level. So I think this will probably also help with raising awareness of the socioeconomic benefits of these services, you know, and I'm putting a lot of emphasis here on the economic part. So and the use of that these services can bring to the private sector. So I also agree with Makoto on the need to improve the policy framework as a basis for this to flourish. And on our side, as donors, we can support programs and projects that encourage setting these sound policy frameworks and regulate and allow cooperation between the public and the private sector. So either as providers of the services, the private sector, or either as users of these services. So, and we see that this is an area that requires more attention, and we receive a lot of, proposals for development projects, and they focus on maybe DRR policies or strategies or mainstreaming DRR policy into other sectors, but not really on the hydromet policy framework. And when it's hydromet, it's usually equipment, infrastructure. So we need to go a step backwards and basically set the ground for this cooperation to flourish. So, well, and then I just like to mention that at the European Commission, we are ready to use innovative financial instruments, such as the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus, to explore opportunities to leverage this private sector financing for these services in general, for climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, and go beyond what Joseph was mentioning, grants and also technical assistance, which is usually what we have done or we are doing. So we are now really in the early stages of understanding how this can work, because there are not many examples. And for the moment, well, we feel that there are more questions than answers. So we'll see what, with time, what will come up. But it's something that, as implementing partners, you should all keep your mind open and eyes open for this new, let's say, ramification of financing. Thanks. Over to you.
Indeed. In fact, what you mentioned about the definition of private sector, somehow it links to these approaches from the needs and demands, societal needs and demands, which Benjamin mentioned earlier. And in a way, that indeed will help, in fact, not only to improve the implementation of the hydromet project, but also integrate the hydromet component in the other activities and development for the different societal dimensions, indeed. So let's hear from Benjamin from GIZ this time. Continue on our discussion, please.
Thanks. Yeah, well, then I would like to ask the question: what's going to be the role of the national hydromet agencies in the future? I guess the role and the function as a public service provider has to change. And historically, I guess many hydromet agencies used to be associated to transportation, in some cases even to defense. And now we are not only talking about weather, we talk about a huge new range of services, especially climate services, with predictions and projections in the future that might in many cases go well beyond what a hydromet service is capable of providing as a service. But nevertheless, I believe before we further continue to discuss the private sector, I guess what we need is a standard, or we need a discussion about standards that can be set by hydromet agencies, because in a rising and more diversified market, it will be important for customers to really gain this kind of belief and also to trust private sector providers. And standard setting, maybe along the GFCS pillars, is something very important, and that needs to be concentrated on. But nevertheless, I would also like to echo again what Joseph mentioned about digitalization and artificial intelligence. I believe that competition is going to be very important, and that we need many more niche products, customization towards the needs of different sectors, whether it is infrastructure or public health and agriculture, and many digitalization or digital products based on artificial intelligence might be the future here. So we are working also in Brazil, but also in the Nile Basin with private sector partners to create digital markets, to see who can join a marketplace to build based on digital applications, marketplaces where demand and also customized services can be brought together and facilitated in a very efficient and effective way. So there are many different platforms, either driven by the private sector or also by the public, and I guess that's something where we need to further look into. And then last but not least, I guess there are also many countries where it will be a very hard task to further support hydromet agencies, and where we need to look beyond borders. Smaller countries with weak hydromet agencies really need to join forces together with regional providers, private providers, because it will take a very long time to support these med services, and I guess we don't have that time. So leapfrogging, as Joseph pointed out earlier, is probably something that needs to be applied here. Thanks.
Indeed, thank you very much. Actually, you remind me of this famous quote that less accurate information is better than inconsistent information, and that highlights really the importance of the standards and certain quality control of the services we provide. And in fact, going back to Joseph's point about this ICT, indeed, that provides enormous opportunities. And at the same time, also that highlights the need to fill the gaps, because the different approach and access to ICT, in fact, it amplifies the gaps that we need to fill as development partners. So let us continue with this time, Benjamin from UNDP, please.
Yeah, thank you, Boram. And I think the panelists have covered most of it. Of course, we live in the same world and we do similar things. So we end up with similar conclusions, and that's great. Let me, at the risk of being maybe a bit, taking some risky grounds here, I would push the argument on private sector all the way to the point to say, that actually certain national hydromet services should pay attention and be careful, because their finance ministry one day will wake up and say, why are we paying all this money to have people sit around and drive cars and do weather when it's free on Google and all the other apps that we have? So imagine a world where balloons are sent over Africa that give free internet to everyone. We may not have so much need for national Met services. Okay, this is pushing it, and I'm being a bit, just provocative here. I actually agree with everyone else that there's more value in all the partnerships that are possible between the national hydromet services and the private sector, and everything has been said, because it is a complex kind of sector. There's not one private sector, like Valentina said. It's not that simple. And yet the private sector is part and parcel of the whole thing. The private sector is already a partner in transporting information from what we call the automated weather stations to the servers of the national hydromet services. So they already have a role in carrying this information, and sometimes it doesn't work because of technical issues or financial issues, but that they already play a role there. And of course, Makoto was right to point out that they're the obvious partner when it comes to disseminating some of the early and urgent messages to populations, right? Through SMS, through mobile phone, WhatsApp groups and whatnot, and the whole ICT. So mobile phone companies play a great role. But they're also, the private sector is also a client, not only a partner, but a client of the hydromet services, in terms of they are hungry for that information. There are so many sectors in the economy that would do better business if they had better, accurate, reliable weather information. So all of this, shows that there's a real opportunity, and yet there are some barriers, as you said, and those are often to do with policies. We have seen certain countries that make it a little bit more complicated for private sector engagement to happen. So yeah, with that, I think it was very well covered subject by all the panelists. So I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. So let's continue with James for this subject for the last input, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would quickly, maybe at the risk of not taking a lot of time, let me add maybe 2 or 3 points to what my colleagues have shared so far. I think it's very clear that, and from our experiences here at the bank and working across Africa, that there is this intersection between the public sector and the provision of the climate and weather information, and also the private sector. And if you look at the map that my colleague Lars at the WMO shows on the distribution of patients that are reporting weather across Africa, you see most of the hotspots are concentrated in Southern Africa, in the Horn of Africa, in Central Africa, some parts of coastal West Africa, and then a little bit towards the west and north coast of Africa. And if you look at most of these hotspots where there isn't data that is being reported, and the assumption that the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services are the ones that are responsible for most of these stations that are not reporting, you will find that in many of these areas, we also have private sector companies. They could be in mining, they could be in agriculture, in major estates, in rubber, in coffee, in tea, that also run their own observation networks, and they collect their own information, the weather and climate information for their own operations. If you go to any African country, you will also always find the national network of research. If it's in agricultural research, they also run agrometeorological stations across the country. If you talk to people in the water authorities and the water and the basin management authorities, they also have infrastructure that they're running that is collecting climate and weather information. But in many cases, you do not have the policy and regulatory framework for all these companies and other private sector players who are collecting this information to share it within the mainstream national system that can then feed into what we call the global telecommunication system of WMO. So even though most of these areas are reporting gaps in data, but there is some amount or availability of some data which is sitting with private sector and some actors who are working with the private sector that is not being reported. Secondly, I wanted to say that if you look at some of the emerging models, I think Joseph and I and others, we have worked to integrate what we call, and I think which was an idea that had been piloted by UNDP earlier on, an idea that is called, focus-based financing, where you have, the users of these public weather and information services contribute to a national kitty that can be mainstreamed within the national budgets, that can be of very great use in ensuring that we have sustainability in the provision of climate and weather services for the country. So this aspect of focus-based financing is very important, but in itself, it needs a lot of input in terms of science and data. And that requires investment in people, personnel, skills. And if you go across many African countries, I keep giving the example that, if you're at Swiss Meteo, you might find they have, 200 to 250 experts in system modeling, in weather forecast, in weather observation, in Earth observation. But if you come to many African institutions, you can hardly find 1 or 2 or 3 people that have the skills to integrate those sorts of, weather products at national level or at regional level. So there's still a big gap, not just on the public side, but also even on the private side in terms of integration of those sorts of tools and applications. The third area that I wanted to highlight is this area of that is emerging of risk financing tools. Again, risk financing tools are very dependent on data. If you imagine perhaps the banking sector or the finance sector that is creating applications for agriculture, be they some kind of insurance products. Those insurance products will require information, science, and data in order to generate the what we call the triggers. So if a company is rolling out a particular product and saying, we are covering X number of farmers against drought, but in order for those farmers to receive a payout when there is a drought, this is the trigger point. That if the season receives 200 millimeters of rain within the first 100 days, then we consider that that's a failed season. Therefore, that triggers a payout to the farm. So you still need information that is going to help design those sorts of products for rollout with the financial sector. And lastly, let me speak a little bit about this the emerging issue with financing of sovereign risk, and this is being piloted by the Africa Risk Capacity. I think if you look at their approach at the moment and in working with countries across Africa, they're using a lot of the data layers that are provided by international companies and, be it USGS or other international providers of Earth observation data in order to plug that into their models for driving the underwriting of the risk products for the countries at the sovereign level. Now, when you look at that, in terms of that engagement between private sector and the public and the governments, there is still the gap that you need the countries to have their own observation networks that can then be used to proof against the Earth observation information. So a case in point is, let's say, for example, Kenya was a member of the risk pool. They paid into the risk pool, and Kenya actually has many parts of Kenya that experience drought, have a bimodal rainfall season. So they have 2 rainfall seasons a year. But the risk tools that the ARC was using to model were not factoring in the bimodal season. And so when Kenya declared a drought in some of the areas whose second season had failed, and they requested payout from the insurance company, they were actually denied because that particular aspect of the bimodal season could not appear in the global modeling with the global data sets that the ARC was using to develop the products that they were underwriting for Kenya and other countries. They also had a similar problem with when there was drought and flooding in Malawi. So there are many areas where we see the emergence of demand for products within the public sector and also the private sector, where we need the public sector and the private sector to work together. Here at the bank, and thank you also through the support of the EU, we've been able now to establish the 4 regional retransmission stations across Africa that are going to be receiving a satellite data for numerical weather prediction. So this is information that's going to be captured from the low orbiting EU METSAT polar orbiting satellites. And we are happy that through that support, we are also able to create the capability for the regional centers in terms of weather modeling, to be able to use those tools at 17 to 20 kilometer resolution. But those need to be downscaled in order for the countries to access that information to perhaps 3 kilometers and less. And just to get the skills and the investments in ICT, in equipment, in high performance computing for the different countries to access those sorts of products is a huge investment that can not only be undertaken by the public sector, but also needs the support of the private sector. So let me stop there by saying that I think there is that interaction. We have those different platforms that we are seeing are emerging, and we have an excellent opportunity going forward to support how the two communities can work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. You in fact touched a lot of different points that we need to discuss really the whole community and beyond. Indeed, panelists' views converge to the need to contemplate fresh approaches to enhance and maintain the benefits of development projects where new players should take part in. There exists also a need to measure the degree of impact, not only the investment volume. So having these in mind, our panelists talk about the mode of implementation. What type of different approaches can be employed in the ongoing or future development projects to ensure fuller engagement of all sector players? And what would be the incentives for development partners in doing so?
Okay, thank you, Boram, for this question. I think we have already touched, as you already mentioned, we have already touched upon some of these ideas in the previous discussion, in the previous question. So from my side, or from the side of the European Commission, is something that continues to come up, is the sustainability of these investments. So we think that in order to have long-lasting impact, as you ask, of this investment, we need to increase the visibility of the services, and therefore increase governments and donors' awareness of the benefits of the observations and climate services, or weather and climate services. So I think this visibility could help build the political will and commitment of governments to finance the services, and also try to bring in other sectors. So I think this is one of the reasons we have insisted in the design of the program, the CLIMSA program, to have specific activities to integrate the climate services into other policy processes. You know, so we have discussed the NDCs, the national adaptation plans, or even the national development plans, and specifically the DRR strategies and plans, so national and local. So we have also added in this program an output specifically to create a socioeconomic tool for the evaluation, socioeconomic benefit tool to evaluate the usefulness and of the climate services, using the examples of this program, the CLIMSA program, working with the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Regional Climate Center. So we are just working on that. We are starting, and well, we will make sure that the results are shared widely, so that you all have access to that. So, and then another element that I think is key for the sustainability and the long-lasting impact of these projects or investment is it's something that hampers, so we have to work on that, is the fragmentation of the programs and projects. So I think from our side, and also implementing partners, we need to coordinate better so that we don't duplicate, so that we don't promote different standards or processes. And then we need to ensure that the investments are compliant with international agreed standards, are embedded into systems and mechanisms that already governments have agreed on, and they are committed to comply with this. So, for example, in Africa, we could mention the hydromet and the African Union's agreement. So I think this is a very important point that we all have to commit to. And then, well, because this also ensures that the quality is agreed by all. The quality of the services that will be developed or derived from these investments will be agreed by all. So I think this is from my side, not to spend much time, and leave others as well to reply to this question. Thank you, Boram.
Let's continue with Benjamin from GIZ about these points.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I think sometimes it seems to me that there used to be a disconnect between the field of climate services and other, let's say, adaptation projects around the world. I have been working in or with adaptation projects for a couple of years now, and it seems that in many cases adaptation projects do focus on adaptation options, measures, and solutions without taking climate services into account. And that, in some cases at least, might have created these lock-in effects or even maladaptation. And I think it is now important, and I see also changes that showcasing the relevance of climate services is a very important aspect that we need to bring into this discussion. So the whole climate service value chain needs to become part of comprehensive risk management and also a basis for climate proofing. I can refer to a case in Costa Rica where the Office of the President last year issued a presidential decree that now stipulates and makes it mandatory for every new investment project, especially in infrastructure, to look into climate risk questions and to climate proof before finalizing the infrastructure. Of course, with the overall goal to avoid costs in the long run. And that, of course, puts lots of pressure now to the hydromet agencies and also to other service providers, because they need to really see, okay, how can we comply with these new regulations? But all in all, I guess it's very important, and that was mentioned many times before, it is important that climate services are embedded in institutional and legal framework of a country. And therefore, then more demand is created. So I think that is a very important aspect, also related to the incentives in the future, also to make it mandatory for accessing funding from various development partners. So this seems to be the most crucial aspects, I guess. Thanks.
Yes, so we are again reminded on this importance of legal framework to ensure the integration among different societal areas, and to make sure that we are consistently and systematically using the scientifically proven information and services. So now we move on to Benjamin from UNDP. To talk about.
Thanks, Boram. Thanks, everyone, for this very interesting conversation. You want to talk about impact, and for me, it means scale. So I think that we are seeing this kind of coming to age of a number of partnerships on this. So we have, for example, the Risk-Informed Early Action Program, REAP, which has been set up about a year ago. We have the Alliance for Hydromet Services from the WMO. And this, to me, just shows that there is an understanding among the major players that we need to come together much better. We need to coordinate better if we want to create proper impact. And so, for example, when, along the lessons that had been learned throughout the last, 10 years of trying to support African Met services, this operation and maintenance issue was such a big issue in terms of sustainability, and with no sustainability, as Valentina says, there's no impact. So the systematic observation financing facility that WMO, UNEP, and UNDP are setting up through the multi-partner trust fund aims precisely at using innovative finance. So, for example, performance-based payments to help countries operate and maintain their equipment. So I think that these kind of partnerships like REAP, like like the Alliance for Hydromet Services that led to SOF, can bring the kind of scale that we're looking at. And the last point I'll quickly make is this idea that we should probably refrain a little bit from designing country by country hydromet projects, which are kind of rather try to approach this at the minimum at a regional level, maybe not at a continental level, but at least dealing with regions that share certain ecosystems together, certain weather patterns together, economic links exist. So you could have SADC and, ECOWAS and all these different regions, at least try and have a regional approach where projects are designed for the entire region, for all countries together, to try and get scale and impact. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, that's a very important point about it without scale, impact can be limited, of course. So we are reminded of also the regional approaches, which also can be an option for the maximum the benefits from the and define the resources and projects scale. So Joseph, can you share your thought?
Thank you, Boram, for the question, and also colleagues who came before me in terms of their presentation, highlighting some of the critical elements that need to take place in terms of the partnership and other elements. But I would like to look at it from the lens of investments. We need to look at it from the angle of investment. Particularly, we have to look at the impact potential of those investments, paradigm shift potential, the paradigm shifting elements, and then sustainability or sustainable development potential, needs of recipient, country ownership, user-driven, as well as efficiency and effectiveness. I think this is what should inform the design and implementation of projects, but more importantly, additionality of those investments. So projects have to crowd in additional finance that will link this to the partnerships that needs to happen around this. Country-driven approach, NDCs, what are the government and civil society and the most vulnerable population that needs to be part of how projects are designed and implemented. But more importantly, there are also critical paradigm shifting pathways that needs to be integrated in ongoing and future programming. Particularly, we think that transformational planning and programming needs to be very critical in terms of determining the approach that will be used. Transformational planning with the climate science has to inform strategic plans and country programming, as well as implementation at aiming at coherence and complementarity, efficiency and effectiveness. And also catalyzing climate innovation. What are the partners that we need to bring together? I spoke about the need for ICT as a driver. So innovations in GBON, impact-based forecasting, forecast-based financing, looking at IoT, big data, cloud computing to underpin the design of projects, creating partnership, quality management, and then policy all needs to come together as part of the catalyzing climate innovation. So the partnerships needs to be built around these paradigm shifting drivers, as well as mobilizing investment at scale. What are the innovative financing options? What are the key partnerships that we need to leverage, and the scale that we need to drive up investment? But more importantly, also, we need to look at expansion and replication of knowledge. We know that indigenous knowledge is very critical. If you want to design a project with a better buy-in, you need to bring partnership from the grassroots that can help co-design the project. So knowledge brokering on climate investment will be critical. Science and technology through institutional collaboration will be very, very critical. Monitoring, evaluation, and learning will have to inform future programs. So we see some kind of synergetic action between the government, private sector, civil society, that will be enabled by institutions like GCF that does a lot of investments in those communities. But more importantly, also we see the role of government in particular. So government should not only be a consumer of the products and services that is produced, but also as a seller of services to business and other consumers. This is also very, very critical. The government can then provide those important infrastructure to society to improve the cost effectiveness of their intervention that's related to, let's say, relief, expenditure, disaster management, while maximizing the performance of critical infrastructure, enabling private sector and other partners to come in, build a stronger partnership that will enable transformational projects to be developed and implemented. And in this role, GCF can provide countries those kind of investment, creating a strong pipeline of both mitigation and adaptation projects. But I would like to say, more importantly, we will have to really rethink the way we do investments. We need to really bring in innovation. For instance, IT, which I think is a low-hanging fruit, you look at the regional approaches. If you look at cloud architecture, you look at service as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, weather on demand, and other innovative ideas. I remember during my time with CleanDev Africa, when I was a UN ECA, we piloted a number of open source innovations across African states. With less than $500,000, we were able to build a very strong network of observing networks, 90% cheaper than the traditional infrastructure. And so if you go to Seychelles, we're able to set up a link between two islands that are about 30 kilometers apart with 50 megabit per second backbone. From basically Wi-Fi, very, very cheap to deploy, train the MES services together with the telecom regulator to enable 50 megabit per second connection between observational networks on other islands and that of the mainland. The same also we did in terms of forecasting system using open source tools. So for the first time in Africa, we're able to deploy a 1 kilometer resolution forecasting system for the islands, which made a big impact. If you look at Mauritius, they were excited to have this. Cabo Verde also were very, very excited when we look at the first time that the hurricane system was going through Cabo Verde, and they had opportunity to use this innovative forecasting system to forecast the strength of the wind at 1 kilometer resolution. But not only that, also the continental platform 9 kilometer resolution system in 2016, which was the first time such a system could be done very cost effectively. And we were able to do this by bringing partnerships. We brought the International Center for Theoretical Physics that does 3D printing, IoT, training in the wireless connectivity, and then also partnering with Iceland Met Service, the ISOR, to build an open source platform that could be used by the Met Services. Capacity was established. So I think these are some of the ideas that we need to think through in terms of the future partnership, universities, innovation, the government, private sector coming together to upscale some of these innovations that are happening. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let's carry on with Makoto to talk about this implementation aspect, please.
Thank you, Boram. Let me try to connect a few points from my, the previous interventions. I think what needs to be done in hydromet space are two things. One is a provision of the public services to protect people's lives and property, and that is the one of the most important kind of, the roles of the hydromet services. And the other, we've been discussing a lot about the provision of the solution or being part of the solution to the sectoral problems or challenges. And we should somehow achieve those two things in a relatively short time scale. An equation we need to think here, those involve private sectors, academic sectors, and other relevant stakeholders like NGOs and the CSOs, in addition to, of course, the development partners. We absolutely need a good coordination amongst ourselves. And, so those partners and actors can contribute to the national hydromet value chain and also that they can be the users, the customers of the services, as Benjamin rightly pointed out. And to me, that this is very different from the many projects of the previous generation. And then, of course, we discussed a lot about the boundary conditions, right? And then importance of the user needs and the policy, legal framework, as well as the capacity and the financial constraints at the public sector end, and also the maturity and also the prospect of market at the private sector end. And of course, that the these boundary conditions are different from country to country or sub-region to sub-region. So the way that we are going to solve this set of simultaneous equations would be very different, could be very different from country to country or sub-region to sub-region. But I think that we've started to understand that the public-private engagement is not just adds-on to the classic hydromet projects, but rather this requires us to fundamentally rethink how to approach the hydromet strengthening. And then I would imagine that the nature of the strategic conversation with the clients, and also that the way that we're going to involve the stakeholders in during that the entire cycle of the project will be very different. And one thing, I mean that after all that those who are sitting in the driving seat is the beneficiary or the client countries, and I think it is important as a development partners that we kind of explain well that the trade-offs between the different approaches. It could be that the traditional approach, or it could be that the approach that take into account the public-private engagement. But in order for the client countries or government to take more informed decisions, that the trade-offs and the pros and cons of the different approaches should be kind of clearly articulated, and then that's perhaps one of the things that we need to work on, and then help the governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a great summary on the needed boundary condition, the ecosystem for the development projects to carry on and to ensure the lasting impact. It's indeed we observe those two aspects that brought by the different panelists, one on this overall the circumstances and conditions to carry out the development process, and within there how to maximize the benefit from or benefit for the hydromet value chain, the elements of hydromet value chain, which the ICT, that the advanced technology and innovation that Joseph mentioned should really be taken into account. So we are approaching, in fact, to the end of our session. So to wrap up, I'd like to invite again each panelist, but this time to tell us, as a wrap up, what do you think is one most important factor for the future development projects to maximize this lasting impact and benefit to these beneficial countries and regions? So just one most important factor. So Benjamin from GIZ, would you like to start?
Okay, thank you very much. So if I had to choose only one, I guess I would echo what Benjamin from UNDP mentioned earlier. I think it's scale and impact. It's really the creation of projects that go beyond individual countries and the consideration of individual hydromet services. Capacity development for them is important, and they have to play a very important function and role in the future. But I really believe that global cooperation at eye level is important between various countries to exchange benchmarks and best practices. IT and ICT is mentioned many times during this conversation. And I also guess we will only strive and reach for good public service results if we go beyond the national borders and involve regional applications and even global applications, including the private sector. Thanks.
Indeed. Thank you very much. It's a powerful statement. Benjamin from UNDP, would you like to share your one most important point you want to highlight?
Yeah, mine is actually very simple. I think it's political will. So for me, that's the number one priority for any project, including this kind of support on climate information and early warning. It's about political will in the countries, and that would be my number one hope, that it's taken seriously.
Very much. So let us hear from Joseph. So what is the most important point?
For me, the most important point will be to look at the paradigm shift that is critical for climate information and early warning system. And for paradigm shift, I see four main drivers. That is, we need to really look at transformational planning and programming to make sure that there's coherence and complementarity, leading to efficiency and effectiveness. Also needs to catalyze climate innovation. We need to innovate to be able to sustain and maximize the benefit. We also need to mobilize investment at scale, and also replication and knowledge expansion and replication, which is critical. We need to really build a critical mass that will enable that transformation to take place. So for me, it's all about paradigm shifting to the next stage. Thanks.
Thank you, Joseph. Now, Makoto, what is your most important factor?
Yeah, well, I agree with my previous speakers. I mean, scale, political will, and paradigm shift are all important, but I feel that I have to say something different. So I'll come back to the coordination aspect, and then I think that coordination is of course important, and I often see that the discussion of the coordination centered around the portfolio on the one hand, which donors and which development partners are working in which countries, and that on the tactical things on the other hand. But as we see and as we discuss, this field that the hydromet space is of seeing that the rapid evolution of thinking, and I think that the more strategic level discussion in the context of the sub-region and also the context of the countries where we operate would be very important. And I think that the impacts of investments would be maximized if the development partners' strategic thinking is more or less aligned, especially when the multiple partners intervene in one country, which is often the case. But I found so that this type of conversation is very useful, and also encourage that the number of the colleagues here are kind of thinking in a very similar way. And so it'll be nice that if this type of conversation is replicated in the context of actual coordination on the ground as well. In any case, I look forward to working with all of you going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Actually, that will make a very nice conclusion of our conversation today as well. So we want to hear from Valentina. What's your most important point that you want to highlight with the audience?
Thanks. I'm the last one. I'm very happy that nobody took my point. Well, for me, the most important factor for the implementation, and success of the investments is the final users. So I think on one hand, we need to ensure that these services reach those that the investments were designed for, in the first place, the most vulnerable communities. And on the other hand, I think this will contribute to demonstrating the socioeconomic benefits of climate and weather services. So it's part of this two, it's the two sides of the coin. So, and we have discussed before that they also drive the demand of the services. So I think their involvement, active involvement is very important. So, and that's why we have put and will continue to put a lot of emphasis on the service delivery part of the value chain. So, and then I think this will contribute to all the issues that I have mentioned before, or that we have all mentioned before, the sustainability of the services. And we continue to push these boundaries of the status quo and go very far to the last mile user. So that will be for me the most important point. And yes, I want to join the other speakers and thank you for this conversation, and I look forward to continue working with all of you more at the technical level.
Thank you very much, Valentina. It has been a great pleasure to have you here today. And thank you again for sharing your mind-nudging and the fascinating views on those basic questions. Let me reiterate the underlying message of all panelists. No sustainability, no impact. And the impact of development projects may scale through enhancing the relevance of hydromet value chain to societal demands through fundamental rethinking of the whole project cycle, leveraging political support, and engaging new technologies. Coordination between the development partners and beneficiary countries has been common practice. And today, we remind ourselves yet again the usefulness of coordinating among the development partners. Going beyond technical and tactical coordination, like how many and what type of automatic weather stations where, we hope that today's discussion and following steps will encourage closer strategic alignment of our approaches in strengthening a national hydromet value chain. So we've shared these fascinating and mind-nudging views and thought for future improvement. We remain convinced that the hydromet value chain modernization in changing environment is in critical need of engaging all sectors of the global weather enterprise. We cannot miss out any of contributions from the stakeholders of public, private, academic, and other sectors. And our panelists shared some good examples and ideas on practical paths to work together. We hope to carry on our collective deliberation here on, and that this roundtable inspires you. Thank you for staying with us, and please do share your opinions and comments at the GW Forum in various occasions for stakeholder dialogue.